in self-experience groups is, who are you? But this question has also been asked much earlier. And tonight's presentation actually has its roots in work that's, I would say, fairly said is 1.5 years old, working very intensively on this project. Now, the development of this part, the PowerPoint here at the beginning, has started off with only like 50 slides, bloated up to over 200 slides, gone down again, and I will not present the 200 slide version, only, only a shorter version to make sure that I will not occupy your entire evening here. The presentation this evening is divided into 3 parts. The first part is a little bit of a philosophical part and a question. Of the history of the question, who are you? What are you made of? What are the elements you are made of? And it's a question that has been asked already through history a long time. The second part is moving into Freud's theory on the question, who are you? On the diagnosis of who are you? And the third part goes over to a new development using artificial intelligence to understand possibly who you are and how that fits in with psychoanalysis and how you can possibly use a project that I have developed for your K1 and K2 papers. So, an American journalist had a layover at an airport and he was waiting for his flight, and there was also a Buddhist monk also waiting for the flight. And so he said to himself, why don't I take advantage of this time and ask this Buddhist monk some important questions? And I could write an article about that. So he goes over to the Buddhist monk and asks him, tell me, what do you think is the most important problem that we have to deal with in this world of today? Now, the Buddhist monk looked at him and said, I would gladly answer your question. But first, I want to ask you if you could answer me just one question. And the journalist said, sure, no problem. So the Buddhist monk asked him, who are you? Now the journalist says, that's not a difficult question to answer. I'm Jim Jones. No. That's your name. Who are you? I'm a journalist. No. That's your profession. Well, who are you? Oh, I'm an American journalist. And he was getting a little bit annoyed, the journalist. He's not getting anywhere. And this game goes on for a while. And he then says, I don't know. And the Buddhist monk says, you see, that is our biggest problem. That we don't know who we are. Now, this question of who are we and what are we made of has been occupying us humans already from a long time. The Buddhists, they say they're put together by the 5 khandhas, elements of which they talk about, which are made up of feeling, cognition, mental formations, form, and consciousness. And also the Greek philosophers, they asked this question and occupied with themselves with it. And throughout history, we also find others, like Freud, who makes a model of the elements of who he believes are, or what he believes are the mind, the psyche is made of. We have here a structure of the mental apparatus, composed of the id, the ego, the VIPs, I'm saying that for the object relations, the superego, and psychic reality. Its development is somewhat put together like this here. At first, we have the id, which is a cauldron of energies that we so far have little understanding about. And we know so little about the beginning structures and its involvement. This id very soon comes into conflict with the external reality. There's a banging of the two. As a result of this conflict between the id and the external reality, we have the beginning of the development of what we later call the ego. And there also begin the very important people. Our superego also is out of this. And also a concept called the psychic reality, a part of our whole mental apparatus, which we call this entire structure here. And this, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we call the mental apparatus, which is the domain of the work of psychoanalysis. This is the object of our work, not communication, which this person has with a psychoanalyst. This is the issue. Again, we have the id, and we will talk about it here a little bit more in depth here. The ego, the very important people in someone's mind, the superego, and the psychic reality, and the unconscious and the conscious. And this construct is called, this, as Freud defined it, the psychic reality. Now, the psychic reality fulfills a function and is not just there out of nothing. Namely, there for energy conversion, for transformations. Transformations from energy coming from the organs, the heart, the stomach, the lungs, all these energies have address information and bring it to the psychic apparatus. Now, the point is about that energy that is brought into the psychic apparatus is it just doesn't stay there. It is also shot back to the organs. What happens here, we could almost say, is a software working with the energies that are coming from the organs, going to the psychic apparatus, and then goes back into the body. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the goal is not where the energy came from, but somewhere else, goes somewhere else. This is, in short, the concept of conversion hysteria. Energy that was brought up into the psychic apparatus gets redirected into other areas of the body. However, this is not all. We are also dealing with what's called the external reality, is information coming from the outside invading the internal world. This is also material information that has to be transformed, worked over by the psychic apparatus. Now, we are not all the same. Some people have a very strong superego. Others' superego is not that strong, but they might have a larger id. And some people have a stronger ego. Now, you might ask yourself, why do we deal so much with diagnostics? Diagnostics is like a car inspection. When you buy a used car, of course, you want to kick the tires to make sure it doesn't just break apart the moment you leave the dealership. So you evaluate the functionality of a system. You rely on constancies so that you can predict the future. Appearances, the outer skin of the car is something very ephemeral. It can change very easily. The underlying structures, that stuff that will last longer, of which everything is going to be dependent on, is what is important. But what are they with us? Can they be evaluated? And here we find ourselves very quickly in a maze of diagnostic systems. Diagnostic systems come and go. Whatever is in vogue today, most likely will be gone again in 10 years. Now you might say, oh, this is an assumption. Very few of you will know what the MMPI is. Now the PI is, or was at the time when I was studying psychology, the diagnostic system internationally. No one talks about the MMPI today anymore. It's been moved away. We now have the 10th, maybe the 11th version of the ICD-10, or the DSM-3, 4, 5. I think I even have a version of the DSM-3 booklet at home still. So there are some diagnostic systems that are also psychodynamically oriented, which you might know. There's like, for example, the Psychodynamic Diagnostic Manual, the OPD, and from Nancy Williams, her famous book. Now, the advantages of these systems is they're established, okay? And they get taught all over the place, all over the world. The disadvantages of these systems is that they have a long lead time before you really can use them. So let's look, what we don't have is a diagnostic system that goes directly to the instances of the mind. Speak the superego, the ego, the id, the psychic reality, and the external reality. Strange, why don't we have it? They all go into different variations. And I think one reason for this is because it's hard for the student of psychology or psychoanalysis to see the id. Where's the id in this room? The id in a person that I talk with, or the ego. It's almost like, oh yes, that's a concept that Freud had. But it's hard to say, well, what's the issue about the ego and conflicts of the ego and the id with the person I'm just talking with. Tonight, I want to show you that it's not that complicated. Just to understand a little bit more about the instances of the psychic apparatus, the organs of it. The id. The content of the id is basically the old stuff of us. It's got generic material in it. It has the drives in it, the repressed material. And it's where the energy from the organs of our body are stowed into. It has a development that is pre-embryonal, an embryonal development, and a post-embryonal development. In its development, it has arrests and regressions. There are pathogenic developments of it. If it's too weak, we might have someone who will not be able to really survive. And if it's overpowering, instances of the mental apparatus, the person will be totally drive-oriented. We have the ego, which, as you saw beforehand, was developed out of the conflict between the external world and the id. It's the management system, psychic apparatus. It has control over instances. It's the organizer, the realistic part. It's mainly with repression and suppression. It's born out of the conflict, as we've already seen. And the management part of the ego is to see to it that the other instances don't get into war too much with each other. If the ego is too weak, this person will not find satisfaction in life. If it is overpowering, we will have someone who thinks he's God's gift to this earth. Now, again, the primary task of the ego is to make sure that these other instances are all in harmony with each other. An instance that has been left out so far has been the superego. Its function is basically to redirect the energies of aggression back to the own person. Don't express your aggression. Its contents are the values and law, and are given to us via the primary caregivers. It's the internalization of our primary caregivers' values by not how they say, but how they do. If the ego is too weak, superego is too weak in somebody, we'll find him pretty soon in jail. If it's overpowering, having too many rules, the person most likely will not be able to live in any way in our society. Now, each of these instances have, at different times, different ways. For example, when you're asleep, your id might be more awake, have more power than the ego. Also, depending on the age of a person, these instances have different influences on the development of the person. When we look at the genetic perspective, we see that the embryo is also a part of the baby. The baby is inside the child. The child is also inside the next stage of the development of the child again. Also of the young man, also of the more grown-up. And it goes up until the mature man. And this is a way of understanding that the child inside this man is the father to the man. The values that were already installed very early are going to be at work all along throughout life. Now, the instances are not just, nice little instances like superego, ego, and id. No. They are constantly in conflict with each other and even in conflict within themselves. Here we see the same model, and there's activity happening all over the place, all the time. The external world, here, this blue circle here, there's always something happening outside, and there's always something happening on within various instances of this model of the person. However, this is the only part that we get to see. All this other stuff back here, we don't get to see that. And we think it's not there. But these conflicts are going on nevertheless. So maybe, if someone is totally exhausted and you cannot see why, it's like a war. Energy is taken up by conflicts that are not seen. We call them also unconscious conflicts. We know of the conflicts between the external reality, the ego, and the id, and so on. Now, there are specific conflicts between the ego and the id. The ego might want to have some satisfaction. The id is for satisfaction, drugs, rock and roll, sex. The ego says, you know, you can't do it now. Wait until later. Yeah, it might be smarter. And so there's a conflict going on between these two instances here. We also have conflicts between the external world and the ego. Conflicts between the psychic reality. Now, let me just tell you, give in this moment a few words for the psychic reality. And that is the area where belief systems are put up. Belief systems in which the person is basically caught in a delusional system. We might also take religions as belief systems. It is beyond, there's no rational thinking involved in it. Now, the superego has conflicts with the id. It says, no, just fun here, you know. I don't want that. And the psychic reality also has conflicts with the ego. And the superego has conflicts with the ego. So you see, we are dealing with war zones within a single mind. And only if we understand these war zones can we say we understand what's happening in these minds. Like one of the ways that the ego deals with the conflict of the id is basically with repression and suppression, puts them down. So let's see if we can find out a little bit more about this area of life. So here we have the ego, which is in conflict with the external reality. Okay, I had one too much there. Now, under normal functioning, what happens there? What is experienced as a conflict between the ego and external reality? Maybe it's someone whose ego is too big for the real external reality and then gets into conflict. He finds out there's ego-superego conflicts. What happens here? Under normal functioning, we would be saying, the superego is saying, you know, get involved in healthy competition, but adjust the laws while you're doing it. In a conflict between the two, what is experienced? The feeling, I'm not good enough, because the superego is saying to me, you know, to my ego, you don't fulfill the ideals that I've set up for you. And the constant drive for perfection is going to really take away your energy. When the superego also induces shame and the fear of elimination onto someone, then we have a conflict between the superego and the ego. Possible reasons for this might be that the ideal ego might be too high, or the other area might be that there's too much of an increase of the id drives. Now, that was just a few slides to that area. Each of the instances can also have malfunctions. And the job of psychodiagnostics is basically to find out where are the malfunctions of these parts? So identifying the disorders within the psychic apparatus is a paramount desire here. Belonging to the id are the sex life, drives, repressed material, and phylogenetic material. Belonging to the external reality is the area of family, work, living circumstances, and finances. Belonging to the ego are the skills, education, work, and conflict management. The VIPs are, as I said, the object relations. And issues pertaining law, ideals, and values and culture belong to the superego. And to the area of the psychic reality, the belief systems, religions, ideologies, and strong convictions. Now, what do the malfunctions look like? We have malfunctions of the id. We also have malfunctions of within the external reality. We also have malfunctions of the ego. And also of the VIPs. And the superego. And again, there are malfunctions belonging to psychic reality. Now, why am I showing you these images here? Is because my thesis is going to bring you to along the line of maybe we can start to build up a system diagnosing a person based on the functions and malfunctions of these instances, and thereby also be connected directly again into the psychoanalytic theory. Now, if there is a dominance of one instance over the other, over the others in this system, we would have, if the id is totally there, we would have a totally drive-oriented person here. He'd be after lust, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and an aggressive person. If someone is only ego, he's only in reality, he'd be a totally boring person. Superego, totally law-obeying person. He's all he needs. If someone is totally in a psychic reality, he might be belonging to a cult. And external reality, the world decides his fate and so on. Now, what I've done here is that I have collected the 10 most common disorders and that you will encounter in your practice one day. And let's see if we can see the differences of the in their size representations and your understanding of them. Anxiety. His id is much larger than the ego. In depression, we'll have a different structure. The superego will be very strong. PTSD. Oops, I'm sorry. Psychosis. See, what I'm getting at is the different instances have a different weight connected to a different diagnosis. So you can start to think about changing this around and saying, when I see someone with with a psychosis, I realize there's much more of psychic reality at work here than there is external reality. Burnout. Here's a nice picture of a burnout. See, there's much more external reality that's involved there, a little ego and quite some superego. Not all of them, but many are constructed like this. They think eating is not good for me, or it's too much. You like this one, ADHD. See, the concept here is that the ADHD is more a result of a very bad defense mechanism system, as opposed to a chemical imbalance, which the pharmaceutical industry is trying to convince you it's about, but it's not. Intoxication and addiction. Panic disorders. Oops. And the psychopath. And I'll show you also what the result of a successful therapy or analysis is that you basically have a strong ego and you're driven by reality and rationality and not by some crazy ideas. Okay, moving along. What does a diagnostic procedure look like? Let's have a look a little bit about the initial interviewing and contracting. I will only do a little interviewing here. So when I do an initial intake interview with someone, I start off usually on a very easy level. Talk about the external world, external reality, work, school, finances. It's not, hopefully not all too threatening. Then move on to issues pertaining with the ego. How good is this person's secondary process thinking? His health, issues, conflict management, the use of defenses. Then move on to the id and find out what does he like to do? What does he do for fun? What about sex and aggression in his life? What are his modes of discharge? And then I direct the conversation into the direction of finding out were there ever any issues pertaining to law, or what his or her higher ideals, values, and relationships. What are the belief systems? And very often that's not enough. Then I'll just go through the whole thing again. But that is only half the story. In reality, this looks, this here would be me. I would have my concept of this person, of a person, and this would be the person I'm doing an intake interview with. And in my attempt to make it as pleasurable as possible, I don't give a structured format, but I kind of like let the whole thing go according to the person who's coming for the interview. So he'll think it's just an easy conversation. I ask one question, and these are the questions. These are the development of the conversation. Yeah, it goes easy all the time, yeah, from here to there. It's like in the unconscious, you know, from this topic to that topic, and so on. So it moved back and forth. This it's my job to start to bring in order in this whole thing. So I have the external reality, these ego, there's id, superego, and psychic reality. So from here to the next level of this seminar, and I'm calling this is not a pipe from Magritte. Out to sea is not reality. What if you could just take the small little snippets of answers or topics that someone said to you in a conversation, and you basically put them into the right boxes, and then see if the data that you collect, similar like face recognition data, see if you can recognize the psyche of a person that way. And it can interpolate things that you don't even know about. And you are using the data of the entire internet to compare your observations. So someone who comes in with this observation already most likely, you know, that like, for example, in big corporations, they only need like 5 pieces of data from you, and they can pretty much put you into boxes and predict what kind of, like, are you going to vote, you know, Republican or Democratic? Well, what about if we could do something like that also about the mind? So let's sign into this project here that I've developed and look at the and look at a software on the internet about, let's say, Jane or Mary. I've only seen her once. And she was complaining about loneliness. And let's go into her session. She's only had one session. This is all fake data, by the way. No, wait, let me just go back. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. And I want to, the general info of Jane is, it's just a pseudonym. She's a female, 35 years old, single. She's got a BA, a nurse, a disposable income of 2,000. And this is all the external data. Now, the instances up here, I'll get into that right away. The idea is, can we generate a report on Jane of just snippets of data to tell us what is the psychodiagnostics here, what are the psychodynamics in this case, what are what are issues that basically the entire internet would tell you about this person. And you can have it in so many languages as you like. This is just the choice. So that's the idea, basically. It's also supposed to tell you how would Kernberg diagnose this person, how would ICD-10 diagnose this person, how would ICD-11 diagnose this person. It can even generate a picture of the person. And you can see, does this picture somewhat match? Now, am I making you hungry? I hope so. In a version that I don't have on the net yet, it even does dream interpretation. I mean, sure, it doesn't take the associations of it, but I've taken, as a matter of fact, for I've done the first, what I would call dream transplant in history. I've taken the sample dream of Freud, and I've put it into the data of a patient of mine, and seen and checked out how does the internet or the virtual reality or the artificial intelligence see this dream now. I was surprised. I was also surprised at how about asking the virtual reality to tell me what are the conflicts that this person has internally between instances, and in the individual instances. I did that with a couple of patients of mine, and I saw, wow, you haven't even seen that aspect yet. So it's smarter than I am. And I'll show you some of these things. So this is just, I will, to illustrate some parts here, let's go into the parameters. Parameters are here. We'll forget this top part here at first. The output language. Like this weekend, I was in the Ukraine. I had the output language Ukrainian, and they all loved it. They said, wow. Yeah. You can also select the report styles. Here's a view of different report styles to be either conversational, descriptive, educational, formal. These are all humorous, poetry. How do you want it? How do you want your diagnostic to be presented? In poetry? Okay. Yeah. Let's just picking, one selection. Or you can also say, I want the report format in different ways. In bullet points, in dialogues, instructional. I mean, you can go crazy here. Tablets, summaries, whatever. So let's go back here. I'll go to the instances here. Here's a list. I first started out only with id, superego, and ego, and external reality. And it started to bloat. And more instances became a center of attention. There was even the change from partnership. Is this person capable for a partnership? How this a German TV company approached me and said, could we kind of like use your system to also evaluate if a person is capable of getting involved in a partnership? It's in the works. So, as you can see, we have so far 19 different instances now. Each have like about 10 topics and a number of subtopics. So let's say you want to evaluate your own supervisor. Yeah. So we have 10 points from which to evaluate your supervisor, and then each one has at least 5 points as subcategories to this point. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So first is a little description here of a supervision, what it's about. How much reflective learning do you have in your supervision? The case discussion, how well is that going? And so on. These are all the subpoints. You basically put in your observations or your experience about into these points, and it will then evaluate your supervisor without him even knowing it. You can add more topics. Cancel. Yes. Are you sure? Yes. All right. So even different schools. What are the topics that belong, let's say, to Bion? Bion is famous for being very short in his descriptions. L for love, H for hate, minus K, and O. So you see, when you come across someone in a session who just doesn't want to know about something, who's putting up a defense like hell, you can say there's something like minus K going on. Now imagine if you've been using this system over like 10, 20, 100 sessions, you can get all the minus Ks right away. So let's go back to Jane. I just have one session with her. Fake, nothing's real here. Here we are in instances. We can reorder them. Yes, we do see them. You can see that you give them their own colors. These colors didn't show very well in the Ukraine because of the projector. And we'll go back to my patients here, and I'll say Jane. I have the session here and just putting. So we have of Jane a little bit of information. We have the date the session took place, and we have 3 items belonging to the id, 2 to the superego, some to this, some to that, and description and so on. Let's have a look at it. We're going to edit this session. Whoops. All right. Now, at the beginning, we have the id here, and here's a small description of the id. And here, let's say the id as an expression of the eros. and I have there romantic relationships. So these are all points of connecting to the life instinct, the libido, and the expression. And here's my comment. Jane is looking for romantic relation, long time single. That's all I have. I'm just asking you to put in snippets of observations. This is something like, you know, once you've learned a little bit about or have read Freud's interpretation of dreams, the point is, dream isn't supposed to be a connected story. The dream is put together of actually incoherent information. Other one later. You just had to look into your id, your subconscious. The story that you make of the dream is a rationalization, so to speak. And it's not the appropriate way of doing a dream, the Freudian way of doing a dream interpretation. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm dealing with the session as though it was a dream. I'm taking snippets and putting them then together. So, expression of Thanatos. What would they be? In her 20s, she was at times suicidal, which is an expression of her Thanatos back then. I'm not asking you to write long stories. Now, from these snippets, three snippets. I don't know if I have any in the ego here. There are a few snippets pertaining to her superego. Let's see. The symptoms. So the somatic complaints are also put together here in forms of snippets. Let's have a look at the eating disorders that this woman has. And so we have here two things like binge eating and also binge eating after stressful events. She starts binge eating and returning to the body dysmorphic disorder. She feels uncomfortable with her overweight. So that's all that is put in there. That's the data gathering. It shouldn't be too hard. Plus also, while you are using it, you start to learn, this belongs to this instance and that belongs to that instance. So it's a learning tool also for students. Also, choice of analyst and all these other things. But let's go now to the list of the sessions. It's just been one session here. Let's see if we can start to play with generating a report. So let's generate something like a general report first from those few snippets of data that we've had, that we've put in, and see what it does out of that. Now it's starting to work. general information. Mind you, scanning the internet worldwide right now. Can you read it back there? This was just information from the information that we put in on general information. I'll save this. I'll take a copy of this. Let's copy it to the clipboard. I'll put this into. I have one Jane already in there. We can have a look at it later. I've just prepared in case everything crashes. Guess how long it would have taken you to write this report? Let's go back to here, and let's have a look at diagnosis. Now this is still, there you are. Now, how about if we also did the following after the diagnosis? Let's see what Kernberg would say about this case. The whole page. Taking the data and putting. Now we also want to do a publication. We can base, let's also see if we can identify some conflicts in here too. Between the id and the superego. I could take any instance and say, give me the conflicts between the ego and the external world and all that stuff. And here you have basic conflicts in. Why don't we also then do the next step and say, well, what kind of literature might be important here for our paper? Just to read further on. Voilà. Then we'll just say, okay, to wrap it all up, why don't we select some keywords? Of keywords. Now we're going to copy them all. back into Word. And first page there. Wait. And as you can see, we're dealing now here with a 6-page report of all of those instances, partial instances, and so on, diagnoses, perception from Schoenberg, in whatever language you want. Now, who have written your K1 are just going to say, oh, if only I had that. Or a K2. But this isn't all yet either. I feel like Santa Claus. I have another present for you. Suppose you really wanted to do research and compare your patients with each other. What about, for example, doing the following? I'd like to go back to my patients and go back to Jane here. Well, for this one, let's go to Mary. Have a look at Mary here. Mary's session. You see, Mary's got 4 sessions. And these are the contents of the 4 sessions. Now, all of these are little snippets of data, and I want to export them into Excel. And just the important instances of sessions. And it's in the downloads, and I hope I can remember it. And it doesn't open it automatically. So I'll open up the downloads here. And here it is. So now I have the 4 sessions of Mary in an Excel file. Now what you can do is you can basically put the sessions of Mary, and behind that put the sessions of Jane, and then the other sessions, and see how they developed also. You could also compare it with other people who are also using this data, so that the system, so that you could do research on what are the topics, when do they come up, how do they come up. So this is an enormous research tool in psychoanalysis, something that will make the so-called, well, we can't touch that so much as, you know, the psycho. It's a private area, and it's so hard to research in this area because it is such an intimate thing. That's over. Undoubtedly, there were times when I first started this, when I wrote the first prototype of this thing, I didn't believe it. I couldn't. It is fake. So I developed the prototype further and further. And I got convinced. It goes, and that's pretty damn hard. This brings us to a question again. Oh, I'll show you Mary. You know who Mary is? Let's, according to the system. Now, I played just around with, you know, what if I put that parameter into the prompt, or that one? Becoming more and more realistic. And then let me show you a few little other things here. This is the beginning, one of the prototypes of Mary. This was the data sheets from Mary's case. And you can see, it's always only these snippets of information that I gathered. Now, this has just been an introductory aspect, which also has, ever since I've started it, many philosophical and ethical questions to be thought about. I was just saying, you can do that, you can do that, you can do that. And I did it. And I've cut out many aspects of this presentation in a private seminar. It would this session would be at least 2 to 3 hours with various other information that belongs to it. But I'm conscious of our time limits here. And I just want to say, Buddha, thank you.
What I'm scared about it, if some marketing company gets a hold of that system, and we are really living in a world full of algorithms and creating a very paranoid world when it comes to the internet and so on. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of super ego things on the internet which we want to make sure in order to protect the privacy and the integrity of the patients.
If you store your reports that you make on your patient in the cloud, do you have the same problem? Right, but if you store them on your PC, anyone can come into your office and they can steal it even easier than stealing it from the cloud. But it's an illusion to think that it's safe by locking it. Yeah. We have here, I know of a colleague here in this room who has an office in the 1st district, and the door was cracked open. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think that this is that problem. Yeah, go ahead.
How can you make it safe?
You can't. I can tell you the following. I'm part of this program at, what do you call it? Here in the SFU Methodenwerkstatt. And 2 days later, I get a mail from Mrs. Terbutz. She's getting a storm of shit mails. How terrible the presentation was. Wait. And I only got to see one of these emails. Yeah. And she said, I'm sending it to the direct, to Alfred Pritz and to everyone. You know, kind of like, Golling's a bad boy. It was 2 days later that I was in Sofia, and I gave the same presentation there. The reaction there was, wow, this is coming. This is real. How do we adapt best to it? Do you see the differences in the maturity? The emails, the shitstorm was an expression of this, the group anxiety here at the SFU. I don't want anything to change. I don't want to, you know, this is going to happen if you want it or not. Yeah?
Of that data that all of us through online, telephone, and so put into those systems, and I do not see that this is any more dangerous than our Zoom supervision session.
Right. Or you just, I don't, in my sessions, I don't keep, I make sure that my phone is not in the room. Yeah. I've had sessions, not sessions, but I've had talks and with my partner, and very soon afterwards I got advertisements for the products that I was thinking of buying. I hadn't even searched in the net for anything like that. Yeah? Yes?
What did you feed to your AI?
What did I?
What did you give to your AI? Which data and so on to diagnose and to look at it? And other question is, are there some common wrong answers that can you give? What should you be aware of when you use it?
I would have to talk to you about a little bit about prompt engineering. Another thing I had to learn myself in the meantime. That's a whole new area of engineering, of IT engineering. It's called prompt engineering. It generates false truths. Yeah. So yeah, it will be in another way, but not in the way that you think you are going to be needed.
But when I see here, I understand you. You say this is the beginning, and I understand this. But when I see like someone who is overweight and being uncomfortable with how she looks, that label of body dysmorphic, which is so extremely far off, and the list of the diagnoses that are severe and take a lot of criteria, I just still can't see how far can this be from really being put to use accurately.
Disturb you, but that might have something, it might just have something to do with your vision. The more you are into this industry, it's amazing what's already being put together.